Thank you very much. And I see that there is a question coming here from one of our students, Matlatsi Nkosi. And Matlatsi is saying, evening, sir, may you kindly give your opinion on an extended lockdown within Africa to allow for African leaders to meet and discuss a way forward with regards to economic development and a self-sustaining Africa. Would this have been a wise decision in efforts to work towards a united Africa? Thank you, sir. I think that's the only question that I see. Maybe we shall ask you to raise hands so that we can get some of the question. It's interesting that when we are on contact and face to face, we have so many hands. I want to see those many hands now here on the platform. Raise your hands. I hope our students are not going to disappoint me that they cannot use technology. We have been on the forefront of this at TMALI with Teams and Zoom. Can you please raise your hands if you have a question for the president, because I want to take at least 3 questions before I allow him to respond. Siyabonga Zita, I can see Siyabonga. Siyabonga.
Good afternoon to everyone. So my question is, there is currently a movement on Twitter which is called Put South Africa First. So I just want to understand what the opinion of the former president would be on that. So basically what the people of South Africa are saying is that we want South Africans to be put first in terms of economic development and all the benefits that we can get before all other Africans. Now, understanding that we want to have unity in Africa, but on the other hand, people feel like South Africans are not benefiting enough because of foreigners and are calling this movement a bit xenophobic. So I just want to understand what the thought on that would be.
Thank you very much. Short and sweet, Siyabonga. Bungaga Mangwetu. Bungaga.
Okay, thank you. Good evening. My question would be, how best do we bridge the gap between our current leaders and the youth? Because they say that the youth now is the future, but in parliamentary settings and our leaders are not the youth. And if something were to happen now and if we have to remove all the leaders, there would be a gap of information and leadership skills. Our mentoring system is lacking. So how best can we get the youth to be in the forefront and being mentored by the old leaders, and our leaders to take a back seat and mentor and lead from the back?
Thank you, thank you very much. Tutuka Mtetwa, another question from you. Tutuka? Is Tutuka struggling to speak?
No. Yes. So I have posed this question to some of the professors and some of our lecturers from before, and I've always wondered, what is a leader to do to protect himself, especially those leaders who are very good for the people, those leaders who are radical, but radical in such a way that they want quick change for their people, for Africans. They are always discarded somehow by the invisible hand. So how does one protect themselves from this invisible hand?
Okay. I think these are many questions. I'm going to take the last 2, which happens to be on the chat side. I think one of the questions on the chat side is that why did the president not institute something like TMALI while he was in the education system, while he was still president? And then we also have Vuyiso Ramokgopa is asking, is there still a place for conventional top-down politics in a majority youth-led technology-driven African continent? If not, what would an alternative look like? And I think I want to stop here, and then I'll take the other questions and the other hands that I saw here on the platform. Thank you very much. As we allow the patron to respond to some of the question. Thank you.
Thanks, Professor Paswana. But before I answer, let me join Professor Vilnkomo in welcoming our students. I'm very glad that people have joined this new school, the TM school, of which, as Professor Vilnkomo said, TMALI is part of. But welcome to everybody, and I do hope that your studies will go well. Of course, I'm very glad indeed that some of our instructors, teachers have spoken, and you can see the quality of our teaching staff. We should really make sure that indeed the students get the kind of information, education, whatever, that indeed they deserve. Secondly, I want to say thanks a lot to Professor Vilnkomo for welcoming us and opening our session and the report on the TM school. Two things I'd like to say about the TM school very briefly. One of them is that I'm sure that all of us are familiar with this concept of gender mainstreaming. I'm sure Ms. Mukwena will agree with me, a very important concept. Now, Professor Vilnkomo mentioned the various subjects that the TM school will deal with. I think all of us need to understand that inherent in all of these subjects would be this expression of gender mainstreaming. So Professor Vilnkomo would not have said there would be a particular subject on the gender and feminism and so on. It's because it has to, in the sense of that mainstreaming, it must be integrated in all of the subjects that the TM school will be dealing with. It's an important matter because of the importance of this issue that Ms. Mukwena was raising about feminism and gender and all of that. Now, the second thing I'd like to say about this is that I was also very glad that Professor Vilnkomo said that the record of the launch should be made available so that people can listen to everything that was said. Because indeed, as Professor Falola said, we are all of us hoping that this school will be, as Professor Ngomo discussed it, and as Professor Falola discussed it. And therefore, I think it becomes important to listen to what was said during that launch by everybody who participated in that launch. It helps to define the school, and everybody has to understand it better. Because I think as we attract students into the school, they should really have a very clear idea of what kind of school they are entering. And I think that would be very good for the student and indeed for the school. And Professor Falola said for the continent. But welcome to our students. And now let me come to the questions and deal with this one about putting South Africa first. That for me is a very worrying concept. This putting South Africa first. South Africa is a very integral part of the African continent. South Africa can't succeed without the rest of the continent. Whoever thinks that South Africa can move ahead all on its own and the rest of the continent is moving backwards, and think that that is possible for South Africa to succeed and move forward, that's very wrong. It can't happen. You know, during the course of our struggle, there are many countries which carried a very heavy burden of our struggle. If you look at Mozambique, and the activities of what was called Renamo, it still exists now, Renamo, but in earlier days, it was an extension of the apartheid and colonial regimes in our region, Rhodesia and South Africa, and caused enormous damage in Mozambique, enormous damage in terms of people killed, infrastructure killed. Angola was the same. Enormous damage in Angola also. People killed, infrastructure, slowing down development and so on. I can go around among many countries, including ones close to us, Botswana, Swaziland, Lesotho. None of them ever said, like the Mozambicans, would never say Mozambique first, which means therefore they abandoned the South African struggle because Mozambique comes first. The Angolans would never say the same thing either, Angola first, because they understood very well the integrated nature of our past and our future. When it is said that we share a common destiny on the continent, that's real. We share a common destiny. Now, for the South Africans, for us as South Africans, we've got all of these major challenges on our hands of poverty, of underdevelopment, of unemployment, of inequality, all of these things. Continuation of the apartheid structures of society, and so on. None of those things. We can't say that we blame foreigners for any of those things. It's not any foreign African who has caused our poverty, who's caused unemployment, who's caused all of these things. That's not true. These are challenges that South Africans that were faced, which we need to confront and resolve. And at all costs, avoid this xenophobia. I've been very worried about over the last few months. The various statements that are being made are popping up in various places of people pointing a finger at us, no, these foreigners, these foreigners, these foreigners. And in the past, when you've had these attacks, which were called xenophobic, I've taken the position always to say, but these attacks are organized by people who are intended in destabilizing our society. That you don't find the ordinary masses of our people in the townships, in the rural areas, that suddenly they suddenly turn hostile to other Africans. That this thing is systematically organized all the time by people who are opposed to the development of our country. So anybody who kind of tries to blame the problems we have, and they are very real, whether it's problems of poverty and all of that, to blame all of those on these so-called foreigners, and therefore to say drive the foreigners away, that person is not in the least interested in the future of our people. That person, I'm definitely certain, is interested in the destabilization of our country. You can't, the notion of South Africa first in terms of our continent is illogical. It's completely illogical. Okay, you take South Africa first. Where does a lot of our water, for instance, coming into Gauteng, where does it come from? It comes from Lesotho. What happens if Lesotho said Lesotho first? And this water, we're going to cut it off and it's going to belong to us. What happens? it's not possible. It's not possible for South Africa to approach the continent as though there's a dichotomy. You can pursue, when you pursue South African interests, you are therefore sabotaging African interests and vice versa. There's no such thing. There's this discussion, a decision taken, very correct decision, taken by the African Union about this free trade area for the whole of the continent, to make sure that we as Africans trade with one another better in order to improve the performance of our economies, in order to improve the changes, the lives of our people, improve the standards of living. Now, when you say in that context, South Africa first, what does that mean? Does that mean South Africa opts out of that African trade agreement, or conducts itself in such a way in the context of that trade agreement that it disadvantages other African countries? I'm saying that the notion put South Africa first based on this idea that the rest of the continent somehow disadvantages South Africa is false. And I think I'm saying also many of the people who put forward notions of that kind are not in the least interested in the development of our country, but are very, very focused on destabilizing us, making sure that we are unable to focus exactly on the solution of the problems that we face. The question was raised about how do leaders who are, as I understood it, who are projecting correct things about the continent, how do they protect themselves because there's an invisible hand that acts to remove them? There's nothing there. I don't think there's a particular protective shield that these leaders can put around themselves, except this shield. The best shield for such leaders are the masses of the people themselves. You see, if you've got a leadership that genuinely pursues matters and things which are in the interest of the masses of the people, a leadership that remains in dynamic contact with the masses of the people, listens to them, and the masses of the people also develop sufficient respect for this leadership to listen to it, it becomes very difficult for that invisible hand to act against them. So that's why I'm saying your best protection as such a leader is the masses of the people, who would see, when they see that these leaders of theirs, in whom they've got confidence, these leaders that are in fact doing exactly these things that are needed to be done in order to address the genuine interests of the people, that these leaders are coming and attack, the people themselves must protect. But you are talking about a people that must be conscious, that must be organized, who must therefore be aware of their own responsibility to themselves. In a sense, to be aware of what this concept means when people say the masses of the people are their own liberators. To be their own liberator, to take responsibility for yourself, to say this task of liberation, a matter that Professor Bill Ngomo raised when he was talking about citizenship and leadership. When the mass of the people take charge of their own destiny, then they will act in defense of such leaders as are relevant to that destiny. I think that is the best protection against that, what was called the invisible hand. I think the issue which is raised is an important question of a gap between the leadership and the youth. How do you close this gap? I think one of the critical things here is that we need a very strong, well-organized, and again conscious youth movement. Whether it's involving the working youth, involving students, involving young women, to be able to stand up and say, we as young people, this is what we want. For instance, earlier today there was people may be aware of this or not. There's a preparation that is going on for a conference in October next year, 2021, on Africa and the African diaspora. In Africa and African diaspora together to really basically to say, what do we do in order to guarantee ourselves a better future? Earlier today, there was a panel of young people from around the African continent who were talking about the Africa we want. That's what I'm talking about. You need young people who are able to come together and to say, this is the Africa we want. That's what would oblige a leadership to listen. It would oblige a leadership to listen and interact with the young people. And I think it's in the course of that interaction that you begin to close that gap between these leaders and the young people. But I think secondly, this is a political decision. Have genuinely progressive leadership, it would attend to this matter of closing that gap between itself and the youth. Because part of that being progressive is a recognition that tomorrow belongs to the young people. And if you want a better tomorrow, you as this current leadership, if you want a better tomorrow, as this current leadership, you must make sure that you help to prepare the young people to be able to take and lead into that better tomorrow. But I'm saying that's a matter that has to do with the quality of political understanding, of progressive political understanding of the leadership. But I'm saying also the youth itself has a responsibility to make sure that it is organized and is therefore able to put on the agenda, like a question that was put earlier today, we as young people, this is the Africa we want. That obliges this leadership to have to respond to that. I think that would be an important intervention to help to close this gap between the leadership and the youth. It is true that there was a question, first question was, what about an extended lockdown for the African leadership to make sure that they've got enough time and all that to focus on these African development challenges? There is a big challenge in my view. There's a big challenge we face about the quality of leadership on the continent. When Professor Kamga spoke, he referred, for instance, to current challenges that are facing Cote d'Ivoire, where you've just had a presidential election. And he raised very legitimately various issues that relate to that. That, for instance, the African Court of Human and People's Rights, had taken certain decisions about those elections and said, for instance, if you take the Electoral Commission, that the Electoral Commission that ran the elections was illegitimate, that it needed to be reconstituted for it to be properly a legitimate independent electoral commission to run those elections. That's a court judgment of an African court. And the government of Cote d'Ivoire ignored that. And then again, as Professor Kamga said, they took other decisions. For instance, about the need for some other leaders who had got disqualified from running or participating in elections in any way, that those decisions needed to be changed so that those leaders become part of the process. The African Union itself ignored all of those things. So, I mean, there's a very important question, therefore, that arises. How do you get the African Union to ignore judgments of the African Court of Human and People's Rights? There's something radically wrong with that. But it's happened, as Professor Kamga said, and the net effect of it, including the sending of an observer team to those elections, itself serves as an endorsement of processes which an African court, a continental court, had said was illegitimate. But the African Union endorses an illegitimacy by sending these observers. And I mean, even worse, when the observer, the interim report, I don't know if Professor Kamga has seen it, the interim report of that observer team of the African Union essentially says everything was okay. And I don't know how anybody can say that. You have a joint report which was done by ISA, the Election Institute for Sustainable Development in Africa. It's an African organization which teamed up with the Carter Center. And they observed the same elections, and they say that you can't say that election was representative in any way, because many polling stations did not open, millions of people did not participate, even as the last day that you had for people to collect their voters' cards. The Electoral Commission itself said only 40% of the electorate had collected their voters' cards. So that from the beginning, you're already dealing with a minority of your electorate. Then you have millions of actually boycotting. So it's obvious that by the time you finish with those elections, you might very well end up with a president elected by less than 20% of the population. You can't say that that's legitimate, but that is what the AU has said, the AU observers. Now, I'm dealing with this question about an extended lockdown for African leaders to come together and sort out problems. I'm saying that there is a genuine challenge. How do we answer the question that we've now been discussing, what Professor Kamga raised? How do we explain that the African Union goes against its own policies to endorse something that is wrong? Now, whether to have an extended lockdown, bringing these leaders together would solve our problems, I don't know. But clearly, what is very important is that, again, we are coming back to a matter raised by Professor Vilkomo, that issue of citizenship and leadership. I think it's absolutely critical that the African people themselves, the ordinary people, must say, this is the Africa we want. And this is the action that we are going to take to make sure that we get the Africa we want. Not to delegate their own responsibility as Africans, just to a small group of leaders. So I'm saying I think it becomes very important that that happens. And part of what's happened across the continent, unfortunately, is that there's been a general weakening of popular movements that genuinely are part of the people, represent the people, are able to mobilize the people. If you just take South Africa itself, look at South Africa and look at the comments that the ANC makes about itself. The ANC says that, look, we've lost our possibility to claim the claim that we are the leaders of the people, we are representative of the people. The ANC itself says that we've lost that. And therefore you need a process of renewal. You need a process such that the ANC comes back to what it ought to be, a genuine representative of the people. So I'm saying it's a reflection of what's been happening generally across the continent. A weakening of these progressive organizations, which are the ones that really need to be able to mobilize the people so that we don't wait for the lockdown of the leaders. But we ourselves, as the masses of the people, say, this is the South Africa we want, this is the Africa we want, and make sure that in that context of being our own liberators, we kind of impose that popular view about ourselves and about our future, and not allow that particular leaders must act as obstacles in terms of achieving what we want. Well, why didn't we start TMALI while we're at you can't as a government, you couldn't say to UNISA, now UNISA, here is the President of the Republic of South Africa. He wants you to have such and such a program. This matter of university autonomy is important. The governments would say, as our government did, the matter of the proper education of our young people is very important at all levels, pre-primary, primary, university, and all of that. What resources do we have? What is it that needs to be done? And in the course of which, indeed, wrong decisions might be taken. But the objective all the time is to make sure that these young people get educated in a particular way. Even with regard to the syllabus, the government would deal with that. But let me give just an example. There is as part of TMALI, there is an institution called SADET, which has produced a number of volumes about South Africa's road to democracy. It's a whole series of books on this. A very important, a very detailed account of what's happened, I think, since 1960. That was the cutoff date that was decided upon. It's very, very important record of South Africa's advance to democracy. Now, sure, as government, we were very keen that needs to be done, but could not, for some reason, do it within the government context. So it was set up as an NGO, and has functioned as an NGO. It continues to function as an NGO, but now attached to UNISA. And so there's discussion that is going on about how might, for instance, the Department of Basic Education access those books, simplify them, so that they become available to children at school. But I'm saying that it's not possible that everything can come from government. But including, so that thing about the history of the advance to democracy here, it had to be done via an NGO, but it's there. The last question I didn't quite understand. Professor Poswan will have to rephrase it. This one talking about top-down. I didn't quite get it. But if you could please restate it, I will try and respond. But otherwise, thanks. I've dealt with the rest.
Okay. Thank you very much, Peter, for that detailed and eloquent response. And I'm going to repeat the question. I think Vuyiswa is asking whether is there a place for this conventional top-down politics in a world which is driven by technology on the African continent. So I think that's number one. And I want to also pick up a few so that when you do the final response, and then you can also take some of the few ones that I see here. There's a question, Patron, where they are asking the effectiveness of the African Union Development Agency. What was NEPA? Whether in its new mandate, is it effective in terms of its programs on the continent? That's a question. And then the other question is, what needs to be done to liberate the African Union from being the only head of state assembly? Where are the masses? I think this is the question that somebody's asking. How do we rescue the AU from being the only assembly of heads of states? And I think the other question is around, would it be possible to have a united African currency? Would it be possible to have a united African currency? And I think I wish to stop here because I'm looking at our time. It's almost 5 to 5, and we should be wrapping up. And I want to give the patron time to be able to respond to the questions that you have raised on the chat side so far. And I think the one interesting one, patron, is around Trump's win. Will it benefit Africa? Whether Trump's win will benefit Africa. And I think I wish to stop here. There are many questions, and I think you will pardon us if we are unable to. It always happens that we are unable to, because in the interest of time, we are unable to ask all the questions that you raise. But I think the chat was very useful, because when we are live and you have mics, some people like mics and then they take too much time. I think this was quite very sensitive, and we were able to take a lot of questions. Over to you, patron.
Trump and Africa. You know, when President Obama, when he became president, appointed Hillary Clinton as Secretary of State. She sent a message to say she's now Secretary of State and would like to develop an Africa policy so that the US government would have a policy towards Africa, which we as Africans, which would serve the interests of the African people. And could we assist in terms of the elaboration of that Africa policy? So indeed we did. We then made preparations and prepared the documentation and all of that, and sent it. The Obama administration never ever had an Africa policy. So we sent the thing, but it disappeared somewhere. So during all of those years, we didn't have an Africa policy. So before that, you had the Bush administration. What for us as a South African government, what was particular about the Bush administration was that they actually listened to what we said about African challenges. So important questions would arise on the continent. President Bush and myself would talk, even on the phone, about these challenges. He came, I think people might remember when he came here, and we discussed Zimbabwe. And because we're insisting with these Europeans and the Americans to say the Zimbabwe question is an African question. Let me leave this to these Africans and the Zimbabweans and we'll solve it. And indeed, the President Bush then made a statement to say basically that publicly, to say when he was here in South Africa, you will be our reference point with regard to Zimbabwe. I'm saying you had that kind of response. The current ambassador of the US to South Africa, when she came and paid the courtesy call. And to say that she was very interested that whatever she does as the American ambassador is not inconsistent with what we as South Africans would want to see happen to our country. And therefore, can we please maintain very dynamic contact with her? She's going to report to us in form, I'm talking about ourselves as the Thabo Mbeki Foundation. She'll come and tell us what she's doing so that we can interact, so that to help to ensure that they don't do things which are contrary to the fundamental interests of the country. And instead that interaction started. I'm just mentioning this thing as an example to answer the question about Trump and Africa. I think what is critically important, let me say, the people will remember that at some point, a whole group of African leaders, the US, President Obama, invited the African leadership to come to Washington for an interaction, I think over 2 days or something. And indeed, leadership did go to Washington, and there was a long interaction there, talking about what needed to be done in terms of the African challenges, in terms of the relations between the US and Africa. I honestly do not know what came out of that process. But the point really I'm coming to is that I think what is critically important, whether President Trump continues or you have a President Biden, is that Africa must have their own view about what it thinks of its relations with the United States and interact with whoever is the president of the United States. That includes Trump if he is president, certainly Biden if he is president, to say as the African continent, this is what we're doing. This is what we'd like to be, this nature of the relations between the US and engage them like that. And I'm just saying that in the past, our own experience has been that when we've had views of this kind and had to interact with some of these American presidents, there has been a response. In this particular case of President Trump, I'm saying the ambassador, the new ambassador of the US, she came to see us in January this year to say, I'm now here. As I was saying, please, I'm going to require your guidance in terms of what I need to do. Obviously, she was not acting on her own. She would have had authorization from Washington to do that. But that's what I'm saying, what critically is important for us as Africans is to say, what is our policy and our perspective about what should be the relations. This has not happened, for instance. Trump has been president of the United States since 2017. You have not had, as far as I know, any approach from the African continent to the US government under President. This is the nature of the one. And I think we should do that even with whoever is a new president that comes in. Yes, there was a discussion at this part of the reform of the African Union. It was said that NEPAD should become a development agency. An example that was used in that context was the UNDP. The UNDP. I think the concept in itself is maybe attractive. The challenge with it is that you then need to make sure that your development agency actually acts as a development agency which means it must have the development resources. It must have resources to say, well, here we are, development agency, we need to develop a road between South Africa and Zambia because it's necessary for regional integration, and we're prepared to put in so much and invite other people to come and join us to top up. NEPAD as a development agency does not have funds. So quite what it does as a development agency, I don't know. But I'm saying certainly, I know it doesn't have the funds to act as a development. To take, for instance, a matter that is obviously very close to us here in South Africa, which is Southern African Development Bank. Southern African Development Bank is a development agency, and it has funds. It gets funds to act as a development agency. I don't think NEPAD has that capacity. So I'm saying quite what it does as a development agency, I really don't know, because without the resources, it's not, it can't really effectively act as a development agency. The African Union is not just a body of heads of state and government, or even just governments. There's an institution as part of the African Union. It's part of its constitution. Therefore, its constitutive act, which established the African Union, and ECOSOC, and Council. That body is made up of civil society. So it's made up of these African masses. They are represented at the very top of the structures of the African Union, ECOSOC. So your trade unions, your women's organizations, your youth organizations, your academic organizations, all of those, they should be placed within that ECOSOC and play a role as representative of masses. Saying that the AU is not just made up of government representatives, including heads of state and government, but it has this institution within its constitution of this ECOSOC. The challenge is a challenge I'd raised earlier, that where you find that then your civil society organizations become weak, when the popular organizations become weak, it then will reflect in a weak ECOSOC. Which is why I think that you then get lack of visibility of the masses of the African people in terms of the functioning of the AU. That lack of visibility derives in part from the weakness of the ECOSOC. Weakness of ECOSOC because the bodies that need to belong there are not strong enough to be able to stand up and to be seen and to be heard. So it comes back to this question that needs to be answered. What is to be done to make sure that these African masses play a role in determining the destiny of our continent? That it means organization, and particularly a progressive organization, to answer the question, what's the Africa we want? And what are we going to do, we as masses, to make sure that we get that Africa which we want? That's what would change the way that the AU functions, so that it doesn't just come across as a gathering of heads of state and government. The matter of a continental currency is very complicated. It's if take for the nearest example of such a currency is, of course, the euro that was established by the European Union. And I think people need to look at that experience to see what the challenges are with regard to a common currency. A common currency. If you had this, the continent decides to establish a common currency, it means many things. Part of which it means consistency across countries, so that no, we are not at the stage yet where we can have such a common currency. I don't think, but I'm saying that people maybe they can have a more detailed look at just as the European example of what needed to be done for the Europeans to have this one currency, the euro. It is correct that the question about modern technology and education is very important. I'm not sure that it has got anything to do with a top-down approach, because there is knowledge. If I come to join TMALI here as a student, I've got teachers, the ones who introduced various subjects earlier this afternoon. Me as a student, I want to listen to them. They are better read about feminism in Africa. They are better empowered, but I want to be exposed to that knowledge. I need to be exposed to capacity to research and on my own, the capacity to learn and to question and all of that. I don't know, is that a top-down relationship? If it is, you can't avoid it because you got to learn something. You learn from received knowledge. As knowledge has accumulated over the centuries. As you come in as a student, you don't have the knowledge, so you must acquire it. Tomorrow you'll be able to produce new knowledge, but you are able to produce new knowledge because you have acquired old knowledge. And I'm saying that I don't know whether that's top down or not, but it can't be avoided. But the modern technology that is used in education, and of UNISA, of course, being a distance education institution, it's a work of, it is tool in trade, this distance learning. It gives a better possibility for the student to study, because you don't need to be in class, you don't need to be sitting in front of, we have Ms. Mukwena sitting in front of you teaching you feminism, African feminism. You can research this, you can even engage her in a discussion on the thing, but I think the modern technology increases the capacity for learning, increases also the capacity to question things, therefore the capacity to produce new knowledge. It doesn't dispense, can't dispense with the professors. Because you say, the professors are on top, me, I'm at the bottom, I don't want top-down thing. It doesn't. But I'm saying it increases the capacity to learn. There's a matter which our universities, I'm sure, need to engage very seriously, which is what has been described as the fourth industrial revolution. Because, of course, everybody who talks about the fourth industrial revolution talks about the impact that is going to have on all it's already having on all elements of life, this technology. Now, what is it that the universities do in order to expose the students to that technology? So that you first of all, you would need the teachers to teach about this fourth industrial revolution, and the students to learn about this. So I'm saying that's a challenge that faces the universities. The Thabo Mbeki Foundation had an interaction with some of the people who are experts in this technology and raised this question and said to them, but if you had a college of education like you have at UNISA, what does the college do in terms of teaching the teachers about the fourth industrial revolution? What syllabus and all of that? And indeed, they then prepared a document, so it's there, these experts, which hopefully would then universities would look at to see what it is that they do. But I'm saying these are challenges of technology, which are empowering if properly utilized. But I don't think negatively address, they address a question which is interpreted in a negative way of top-down learning. Because to access existing knowledge, you can only access existing knowledge from knowledge that exists. And people who therefore have got access to that knowledge. If they're at the top, sure, they are at the top. But there's nothing wrong about accessing that kind of knowledge. But I think there's everything correct about being able to challenge that in order to be able to produce new knowledge. And this modern technology would help in that regard, including what is referred to as the fourth industrial revolution. Thank you very much, Professor Paswan.